Hey everyone, it's Kathy Cronin from Broken Roads, and I'm here today for Amy Howard at Home to show you a basic flip on this Bombay chest. These things, usually you can find them on Marketplace for around between $20 to $70 for the most part, depends on the size and what kind of shape they're in. This one has quite a few nicks and scratches on it, so it definitely needs sort of an uplift. And I'm going to show you what I just called a basic flip, which means we're going to upgrade the color, kind of get rid of some of this dated scrolling in here, and then also update the hardware a little bit, just freshen this up. I'm also going to do some what we call edging, taking paint a darker color than the base color, and then edging these fine lines and curvatures on here to really accent the beautiful parts of this piece. They have wonderful curves. Look at the curves on this, it's just amazing. And then after that, we'll probably do a light glaze just to give it some depth, and then a little bit of waxing around different areas, or darker glaze, dry brushing around different areas of the drawers and the edges to give it a really, really extra deep depth look. So let's get started. First step is Clean Slate. Clean Slate is a product that you use to remove all the waxes, dirts, and oils from your piece before applying any product. This ensures that whatever you apply to the piece will adhere very well and last for a long time to come. I saturate the rag usually about 2 to 3 seconds and then start running it over the piece, concentrating on the areas that have heavier oils, waxes, or dirt on them. And then I want to make sure that I continually turn over the towel and move on to the next section without reapplying that same dust, dirt, or wax to the piece again. Now this should dry in about 10 minutes and then it will be ready for the product. The really nice thing about Clean Slate is that you don't have to go back over it again and remove it with another towel. It's just a one-stop shop right here. It's a great product and I encourage you to use it on each piece before you begin applying any of the products. I've selected Amy's Wedge brush and Artist brush for this next step. I'm applying the one-step paint to this piece. The color that I've selected is Weybridge Classic. It's a lovely neutral bluish gray color, has a little bit of green undertone to it, and is a very complementary color. This will usually take about 2 coats on a color of base like this brown, this medium brown here. And I do know that Weybridge Classic has excellent coverage overall. It is one of those colors that you don't have to apply several times, like some of the whites. It's going on very smooth. Now remember, you're just going to do 2 thin coats with drying time in between. I usually think about 20 to 30 minutes is sufficient before you start the next coat, unless it's very humid where you're located. Then you may want to wait a couple of hours. Once this is dry, we'll move on to the next step. I'm using Amy's Artist brush for the small space in here on this piece. The Artist brush has excellent control and very soft bristles. I really like it for, tight fitting corners, places that you need to use a smaller brush and you need a lot of control. It applies paint very well. It holds a lot of paint, which is another thing I really like about the brush. And it's always good to have one of these handy in your supplies. I'm now getting ready to do what we call dry brushing. So I have 2 coats of paint on this piece. It's fully dry now. And all I'm going to do is take a darker color. This is called Graphite in the one-step paint. I'm going to take the darker color and put a little bit of paint into a cup that I will use to do the dry brushing on this piece. And I'm only going to start with the corners, the edgings right now, these little nicely protruded areas that will accent really, really well. So I'm just going to add a little bit of paint into my cup. It does not take a lot to do this. I probably have less than a tablespoon of paint actually inside this cup. And then I'm going to put my brush into the paint and just pull a little bit of it off, just like this. There's very, very little on here. This is one of my really, really well-loved Amy Howard brushes. Can you tell? I've used this thing over and over again. I love these brushes. This is the 1.5-inch chip brush, one of my favorite ones to use. And then I'm going to remove some of the paint just onto a piece of cardboard like this. Now the thing is, when you're doing a dry brushing, you don't actually use the tips, the edge, the top of the brush to do the brushing. You take the brush, you turn it sideways, and you're going to use the side of the brush on the corners. So I'm just going to take it like this with my hand. There's paint right here, and then I'm just going to run it along the side just like this. And it's a little bit hard to tell right here. I'll see if I can get a close-up for you. But what this does is it mimics the same thing as actually sanding down your corners. I don't like to sand pieces that, that's what people call distressing. I don't like to sand them because I feel like it can ruin the shape of a piece. A beautiful piece, if you distress it and you decide you want to go back later and paint it again, you've sanded down some of those edges and you can't get that back. So you can always mimic that with paint. That's why I like to do it this way. So I'm going to go around on a lot of these nice curvature areas, these corners down at the bottom on the feet as well. And then after I get that finished, I'll step back and see if I need to add a little bit more. We may do that later on down the line, but just a little bit at a time. Take your time with that and practice on some pieces for a while if you've never done this before, but it's a really, really nice technique to use instead of sanding. Let's get this started. Next step is glazing. So I've applied the dry brushing to this piece everywhere that I feel like I need it. And I could do some more later, even after the glazing if I want to, but I want to add this on first and just see where I'm at. So glazing adds depth and dimension to your piece. It gives the color that's underneath sort of a subtle hint of that color and lets it shine through, but yet adding this, this additional layer of color, and it takes your eye and moves it around the piece. Just you're seeing all kinds of different movement on the piece that you wouldn't have seen on just a flat base paint. I guess that's how I like to explain it. And so it's a simple mixture. You just use 3 things: water, glazed over, and then whatever the product is that you want to use to make your glaze base. And so I've selected Amy's gel stain in Hazel Mahogany. It's a water-based gel stain, smells wonderful, and it mixes very well with the glazed over. So you add equal parts of gel stain, glazed over, and water into your container. I've mixed this already right here. Gel stain, glazed over, and water into the container, and I'm getting ready to apply it to the piece. Now, this is a lot of mixture. I'm not going to need all this. I will probably end up just putting it into a sealed container and using it for a later project. I'm using chip brushes for this process. You can use a sponge to apply it, but I prefer chip brushes on these larger spaces. It really just kind of depends on the project. So, and then you're going to also have what we call a negative tool. So these are your positive tools, what you're applying your product with. And negative tool is what you're pulling your product off with. So I'm going to use a clean, lint-free dry rag for this process. And it goes on very quickly. You need to pull it off quickly, or otherwise it will dry on there just like you placed it on the piece. So you want to take a section at a time, apply it, and wipe it off, and then move on to the next section. So let's get started on this. We'll do some close-ups so you can see how this works. As you apply the glaze to your piece, just gently fill your brush, pull off any excess, and then move it across the drawer or the base part of the piece, working in sections. You need to put the glaze on quickly because it will dry, so you want to make sure that you don't leave it there too long without pulling it off with your negative tool, which would be a clean, dry, lint-free rag in this case. So I'm applying the glaze to the piece right now, and once I have this all covered here, this first section, I'm going to remove it with the clean, lint-free dry rag. As you can see, I'm pulling it off, working across the piece, getting a nice coverage on it, making sure that I didn't miss any sections. And then as I'm pulling it off, I'm just trying to keep an eye on it to make sure that I'm evenly removing it and I don't have big areas where I've missed the glaze or that I didn't have any at all. So it's a nice even coverage. This will take approximately 20 minutes to dry, but I like to wait a couple hours before moving on to the next step. And then we can do the coverage protection step at that point. The first step in protection is going to be the Mind Your Own beeswax. So what you do is you actually take some of it and you put it onto a piece of cardboard, and then I'm taking, in this case, a 2-inch chip brush and moving the brush through the wax, pushing it back off onto the cardboard so that I only have just a little bit on the brush when I move forward. I'm doing 100% coverage with the Mind Your Own beeswax, applying this to the piece all over, and then I'm going to let it dry about 2 hours. You normally have to only wait maybe 30 minutes or so, depending on the humidity in your area. But I'm getting ready to also apply dark wax after this. So I'm going to wait a good solid 2 hours and then I will apply the dark wax. It's the same concept with the dark wax, except the dark wax is in what we call a puck. So with the puck, we're going just to remove the lid, and I'm going to use a 2-inch chip brush inside the puck, making sure that I saturate the brush well with the dark wax, and then I'm going to offload that onto the piece of cardboard because a little bit of dark wax goes a long way. You want to start out with less versus more, and then you can always add more, but it's just a lot more difficult to take off the extra as opposed to adding on more if you see a place where you think it needs a little bit extra dark wax. So here I am applying it at first just to accent the corners that I'd already painted. Remember, with the side of the chip brush to show sort of a worn look. So I'm starting that on this section here, and then I will eventually go over the entire piece with dark wax in various locations just to give it a nice warmer, older, sort of worn feel, but heavier on certain sections to really show a deeper worn look. We're going to let this dry about 2 hours, and then I will fully buff it with a clean, lint-free, dry rag to give it a nice sheen. And then it'll be ready for hardware and ready to go to a new home. Here's our finished piece. The Weybridge Classic is a great base color, and then we added on the dry brushing on all of the corners to accent this piece. Then also added on a glaze that we made, and we added on the Mind Your Own Beeswax with the dark wax as an accent on the whole piece. I used a clean, lint-free dry cloth just to buff it and give it a nice sheen. And then after I was finished and I put the hardware back on, I realized that the best thing to do was to go ahead and do something to the top to blend in the color of the hardware to this top. It was just a little bit too light. So just a glaze, like we talked about the glaze earlier, where we make it with the glazed over water and your base color or your base product. I did that same thing with an actual color and put it all over this piece. This is Good Man Is Hard to Find, a one-step color that is just beautiful, a dark, deep gray. So I use that and glaze the top of this, and it's ready to go to a new home. Thanks so much, you guys, for sharing your time with me today. I hope you have a wonderful week. Don't forget, tag 3 friends on this video to be entered into a drawing for a free 16-ounce can of one-step paint in Weybridge Classic. Y'all have a great day.